Yeah, just by way of background, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with Wang Bi or Chinese history generally around the Han Dynasty or fall of the Han. But basically, this is a sort of around the Han Dynasty or fall of the Han. But basically, this is a sort of an early mid-3rd century thinker. So he's born essentially right after the collapse of the Han Dynasty. I think we all know what the Han Dynasty is. China was unified in the 3rd century BC by the Qin Dynasty. That fell very quickly, and the Han took over. The Han Dynasty lasted a long time. There was a little break in the middle where a man called Wang Bi sort of tried to start his own dynasty. It didn't work out, although he's a very interesting figure. Then you have the Han Dynasty resumes. But by the 3rd century, it's collapsed. And so we're going into the Three Kingdoms period. So this is not a peaceful and stable era when Wang Bi was born. In the West, if you want to have an idea of when all this is happening in the 3rd century, we're talking late Roman imperial era or mid-late Roman imperial era. Wang Bi is technically a contemporary of Plotinus. They never met, but they're living at the same time. Wang Bi also died very young. He was in his early 20s. So he died at a very, very young age, maybe 23 or something. And but he produced a large number of works. And as we're going to go over his biography quickly, you'll see he was associated with a lot of the most famous thinkers in China. And they wrote things together and argued things together. So I almost want to say it would have to be sort of a team effort, but essentially, there's a large volume of text from a very young man who's considered this intellectual prodigy. So he's born in this extremely violent and chaotic era. By way of background, in the Han Dynasty that had just fallen, there were these large-scale efforts to gather up all the ancient material they could from pre-unification China and try to preserve it, try to compile it into collections of texts, try to reconstruct texts that they thought were lost or that had become disorganized. Maybe they dig up a grave and they find some more texts and they try to compile them. So there's this big effort during the Han Dynasty before Wang Bi is born just to get all this ancient material together and try and preserve it. And then there's also this strong tradition of trying to comment on them, try to interpret them. And it can range from things like comment on the etymology of words, comment on maybe a work has a historical example that they use for an ethical lesson or moral lesson. Maybe they can add some more historical detail drawing from other texts. They try and provide more detail. So there's a strong tradition of commenting on all these texts. And I just gave you the mic mask. Again, if anyone wants to talk, just raise your hand. I will let you. But as we read through the text as well, I'm going to be pausing so that people can do so. But Mask, please go ahead.
Yeah, so this might sound a bit odd, but I was reading just like offhand as you were speaking. I was looking at the material you had posted. I looked at the English translation, and what immediately stuck out to me is that, this is talking about the Tao, and this is the Tao Te Ching. Yeah, but I never really looked at the text of it, and now that I have, I don't know how else to explain it, but I'm Hindu, so I have read the Bhagavad Gita, and it also speaks of the formless, infinite, eternal that came before everything else, and the Guru Granth Sahib also speaks about it, and the Tao Te Ching also speaks about it. I knew about it, but reading it with my own eyes is like a surreal feeling. It confirms a lot of my thoughts.
We're going to read through it, and you'll probably find there are a lot of, obviously by Wang Bi's time, Buddhism has come over from India into China. There is some cross-cultural exchanges between China and India at the time. I personally am not that familiar with Indian works, but this is a text. What we're going to read is essentially a text that tries to extract, I suppose, some metaphysical teachings or metaphysical model of the Tao Te Ching, and try to sort of summarize it and draw up a model for people to appreciate. And so, yes, he's going to talk about the formless and the nameless and how this relates to the variety of things that we can directly touch. As an intellectual movement, Wang Bi is going to be described as part of a movement called Xuanxue, which is sort of the study of the dark. And so by the dark, we're really talking about a mystery or something that can't be directly perceived or touched. And so we're talking about the featureless, the nameless. So really the Xuanxue authors are talking about metaphysics, talking about something that is beyond or other than the variety of things that we can see and touch, and maybe gives it a context, or maybe is a root of it, maybe nourishes it, keeps it in existence, things like this. There are multiple thinkers. It's not like Wang Bi is the only one, and they do disagree with each other in certain ways. But if you like that topic, stay, because like you saw in the text, we're going to be discussing that, and we're going to be reading that. And that's really the focus of Xuanxue. They want to give some sort of metaphysical reading or understanding of these older texts, like the Tao Te Ching, or the Zhuangzi, or the Book of Changes, the Zhou-yi. But in any event, for Wang Bi, the world is in sort of political chaos, intellectual chaos. There is this history of respecting ancient texts and trying to preserve them. There is this history of writing commentaries on them and trying to interpret them. But all the institutions are now shattered, and it's really not clear how to go forward at all. So it's a huge opportunity in his lifetime for new thinkers to do something different or do something amazing, like write this study of the dark material where they think about the metaphysical structure behind Taoism or other works. But it's also just a very chaotic time, and very dangerous time, actually. You'll find that some of the people Wang Bi associates with, they're scholars, but they wind up getting executed. But anyway, Wang Bi himself, he's born in the capital, Luoyang. He's born to an aristocratic family that includes government officials, very famous scholars. Sorry, I muted myself somehow. He's basically getting the best education possible at a young age. He's got a very well-to-do family. He's closely associated with the most famous scholars. And he's generally thought of as sort of a child prodigy, like very brilliant, very intelligent. So he's in the exact right position at a time when something new can be done because the old institutions have been destroyed or have collapsed in some way. This era is also defined by oral debates, so people are arguing. There's a tradition of having these back and forth clever debates with each other. And also many of these famous scholars are kind of gathering to not just have these oral debates, but also have I don't want to say drunken blowouts, but they're abusing alcohol and strange drugs. By drugs, I mean one of the most famous scholars that Wang Bi is associated with. He is famous for consuming a mixture of minerals that get crushed up and then consumed somehow. And apparently if you crush up minerals in certain ingredients, it has some sort of effect on the body and can make you feel extremely ecstatic or maybe hallucinate, or allegedly expands the mind. So, extremely chaotic era. All the institutions are shattered. Wang Bi is hanging out with the most famous, brilliant scholars of the day. And he's very young, so he's like this childhood prodigy. And people are having these oral debates continuously, and they're abusing alcohol and drugs. So I don't want to say they're all abusing it, but they are. Mars, you got your hand up again. Please speak.
Yeah, I don't want to speak this time. I just have one question, right? Because it's said that China shattered many times, but what happened this time in particular that caused society to shatter? Does it have any relation to what Wang Bi is talking about? Why the collapse happened? Does it have anything to do with what he's talking about?
So, yes and no. First, Wang Bi is born after the collapse, right after the collapse of the Han Dynasty and the beginning of the Three Kingdoms period. So anyone who wants to look up why the Han Dynasty, or why there's a collapse at this time, look into the history of the late Han Dynasty and the beginning of the Three Kingdoms period. is Wang Bi writing about history directly? No, he's not. He's not writing a history of the early Three Kingdoms period. But he does write about metaphysics and kind of gives the universe a certain structure or ordering principle. And then he's going to talk also about politics, like how should you govern society or govern the people in order to, be in accord with the way or be in accord with the metaphysical structure of reality. And so if you wanted to say, like, is Wang Bi talking about why society collapses? Kind of. He's talking about governing principles or systems behind the particular events, and then he's going to give advice about how to accord with those principles so that society succeeds, or so the king or emperor's goals are achieved with minimal disruption or problems. But yeah, if you want the history, it's going to be the Han Dynasty, the collapse of it, and the early Three Kingdoms period. I said Wang Bi wrote a large volume of texts. We have, in some form or another, I believe 5 of the texts. So we have a commentary on the Book of Changes. We have, which is sort of like a line-by-line sort of deal. And then we have another set of essays that just talk about the structure of the Book of Changes. We have fragments of a text discussing the Analects, Confucian Analects. We have a commentary on the Laozi, which is a Dao De Jing, and that is, again, a line-by-line commentary. It's a much longer text, so I have a copy, I've read it, but we're not reading that today. But that's the Laozi Zhu. That's just, again, line-by-line commenting on the Dao De Jing, giving each stanza or section some interpretation. And then the last one, which is what we're going to read today, it's what it is it's a series of short essays that pull out the metaphysical and political teachings of the Dao De Jing, and then try to summarize them and put them into like a coherent and clear essay format. It's called the Laozi Weizi Lue or Lue Li. It's translated by the guy who did this translation as the structure of Laozi's subtle pointers. The Laozi there is another way of saying Dao De Jing. So it's it's just an alternative title for the Dao De Jing. It doesn't actually mean the man necessarily, although it can. But you'll also find that this text we're about to read has its own multiple names. I said Laozi Weizi Lue Li. It also has a Laozi Weizi Li Lue, or it can be Laozi Zhi Lue. So there's multiple different titles. But basically, it's a short essay that's going to take out the teachings, not do a line-by-line commentary, and just try to make sense of what metaphysical model the Dao De Jing is trying to propose. The text itself was actually lost for quite some time. But in the 1950s, what happened is there's this huge compilation of Taoist material called the Daozang. And I'm not familiar with the Daozang. The title is Dao as in, Dao De Jing De Dao. But the Zang is like a storage place or a vault or a repository or a place to hide things. So just the title of this text, if I had to translate it, would be like the storage place for Taoist writings. But apparently it's just a huge, huge volume of writings, and all sorts of writings just related to Taoism from many, many hundreds of years. And essentially there was an anonymous essay in there. But in the 1950s, someone took some fragments that we have from the text that we are going to read today and saw that they matched up with a work in the Daozang that nobody knew who wrote it. It was just anonymous. And so they went, here we go. I think I've found, after however many centuries or whatever, the Laozi Weizi Li Lue. So, they wound up finding it. And also the content, of course, is consistent with his line-by-line commentary on the Dao De Jing, the Laozi Zhu. So there were other reasons to believe it was this text. But just in the 1950s, they figured it out. And maybe there are even more to be found in that Daozang. Apparently it's just a huge, huge body of work. As I said at the beginning of the space, I put the Chinese and the English part of the work up in the Jumbotron or sticky to the top. The actual person who did that translation, just to give him credit, is Rudolf Wagner, or Professor Rudolf Wagner. And he wrote a book, a Chinese reading of the Tao Te Ching, and several other books I've also read of his. And if you want to get a copy, it's there. And actually a Chinese reading of the Tao Te Ching, it also comes with the line-by-line commentary, the LaoZi's. But that's too long. We're not going to read that. But it's in the same text if you buy that book. I also want to just, because we're all native English speakers here, or at least I'm guessing most of us are, there's a funny grammatical style to the text. It's called interlocking parallel style. I'm not going to try and teach everyone about IPS. I'm not an expert on it. But it just is when you look at the English translation, if you go to that, if you go to the screenshots in that tweet, you'll see that it's broken into sections. It'll be like part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, and they're arranged in a kind of pattern. And that's because there's this unique grammatical style to the way it's written. And the positioning of the words, or the style, and the way that they pair together affects the way that the translation is done, or how we attach let's say, an adjective to a noun. We know which adjective goes to which noun because of the location and the way they're paired with other characters. So right at the beginning of reading the actual text, I'll give an example of this so it's clearer. I'm not going to go into great detail about it. Again, I'm not the expert on it either, but I think it's interesting, and it gives you a sense of how unique the writing style can be. So, yeah, that's essentially it in terms of the introductory comments. If anyone has any questions about Wang Bi, feel free to raise your hand, or where the text came from, or how we have it, or whatnot. But otherwise, I'll just dive into the text. I'll give an example of how IPS is going to work, the interlocking parallel style, and then we'll just read through it. Mask, you got your hand up. Please talk.
The way you described IPS makes it sound a bit like meters in poetry in Western literature, or some kind of maybe like mnemonic device, or some kind of specific way of writing that makes it possible to either recite this text or read it again and again. So does that contribute to it? As in, is it meant to be read aloud multiple times?
So it definitely has a certain mnemonic sort of style to it that would help memorizing it. But did Wang Bi need to memorize this? No. Did anyone need to in his era? No. They're writing it down. But remember, he's interpreting the Tao Te Ching, a much, much older text that I don't think anyone really has an exact reading on how that text gets put together or who writes it. But part of it is that if the author of the sections of the Tao Te Ching that Wang Bi is commenting on had that style, whether for purposes of memorization or not, Wang Bi is going to inherit that style, or he's going to need to adopt or somehow accommodate that style, because he's commenting on that text and he's trying to put forward his interpretation of the text. And if he's going to say that this adjective connects to this noun, or this section should be read in this fashion, he's going to want to argue that the grammar or the writing has a certain structure, and so he's just going to have to come to grips with it. And so does he need to memorize his own text or write it in this fashion? No, I don't think so, but I think it strengthens his position if he can argue that the Tao Te Ching has a certain style to it, and then incorporate that into his own work. So kind of inherit it. But yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll start right now and just give an explanation of how IPS works in that first section, and then you'll see what it's like. You mentioned, is it like Western poetry? There are people here who are much more familiar with poetry than me. Maybe they'll comment and weigh in on that. But I'll just start now, and I'll give an example of it. So if you bring up the first screenshot of the English translation, what you'll see has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So one says it is generally true with regard to. Then 2 says, that by which things are created. Then 3 says, that by which achievements are brought about. And 4 says, that things are necessarily created out of the featureless. And 5 says, that achievements are necessarily based on the nameless. Now that's the order in the sentence that it goes in. So if I'm looking at the Chinese now, the first character there is going to be fu, which means, just signifies that it's the start of the work or start of a section. It could also mean something like, it's the case that, and then you write whatever you want to write after that. Then the next 4 characters are 物之所以生. And that's the next 5. So that's the next 5 characters. That's section 2 in English. 物之所以生. And then the 5 characters after that are 公之所以成. So I know not everyone here is going to be speaking Chinese, but in that 5 characters, the first set of 5 characters, the middle 3 characters are 之所以. And then the second group of 5 characters, the middle 3 characters are again 之所以. So actually these are a pair because they're right next to each other and they're 5 characters long. They form a meaning, they have a coherent meaning together, and the grammatical part, the middle part, is the same. The only difference is the first pair is talking about wu, or things, or it can be also animals, and then it says sheng, or created is how it's being translated here. And then the second grouping says gong, or achievements, and cheng, or brought about. And so we form them into a pair. So that's why in the English translation, the fu is number 1. It is generally true with regard to. And then that pair I just mentioned, 物之所以生, 公之所以成, that's going to be 2 and 3. And then we can cut that off as a pair. So 2 and 3 are a pair. And then we're going to go on to the next 2 sections, 4 and 5, and they're also going to be clearly paired together. Now the first character here is B. I don't know why he didn't separate that out, but whatever. We're going to just treat this as a B means necessarily. So the next rhyming pair, or the next pair, is going to be 生乎无形. That's 4 characters and 2 grammatical sort of things in the middle there. Well, 1 really, but. And then the second one is 有乎无名. So you can see that in the first part of that second pair and the second part of that second pair, the middle 2 characters are the same. Hu wu and hu wu, it's the same. So we know that we have 2 pairs here. We have the first pair, 5, 5. Then we have the second pair, 4, 4. And that way, we know, looking at the English now, if we go back to the English, we'll see that the translator for number 4 has written that, and then in brackets, things, are necessarily created out of the featureless. The word things is not there. So how does he know that featureless is being applied to things? He knows because there were 2 pairs, and the first half of the first pair connects to the first half of the second pair. And so that's why he's written it this way. And that's the argument that the word featureless applies to things, because of how it's been put into these pairs and how they line up with each other. And actually, if you wanted to read it this way, you can do this. Look, in English. It is generally true with regard to that by which things are created, that things are necessarily created out of the featureless. So I went 1, 2, 4, and then I would go 1, 3, 5. Because again, 3, 5, 3 is the second half of the first pair, and 5 is the second half of the second pair. So they go together. So that's, I know that was a kind of a long-winded sort of explanation there, but that...
You've muted yourself.
Oh, when did I cut off?
I don't even remember because it's been like a good 2 to 3 seconds.
Jeez, did I mute for a long time now, or just a few seconds?
You explained the pairings and then cut off.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully I didn't mute myself for too long. But essentially what I'm saying is the pairings of 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 basically allow the translator to see how to join certain words to other words. And you can see that if you read 1, 2, 4, it's coherent, right? It is generally true with regards to that by which things are created, that things are necessarily created out of the featureless. And again, 1, 3, 5. It is generally true with regard to that by which achievements are brought about, that achievements are necessarily based on the nameless. Because the first half of the first pair matches up with the first half of the second pair. And the second half of the first pair matches up with the second half of the second pair. That's why it's been written that way. I see Spalaton has a request to speak. Please feel free to speak, Spalaton. Spalaton, feel free to speak. I see you requested the mic, or were you just preemptively requesting?
No, thanks for the space. I had a quick question. The word featureless here. What does it mean? And do you know a little bit about what the Wang Bi here means about this? Because when I haven't looked at now closely, but overseen this, it really has a lot of Neoplatonic, or it sounds very similar to this. Maybe you can say something about this, or?
Yes, I got some comments actually that I'll give throughout the text. I've read this text a couple of times now, and before starting the space, I wrote down a few notes to go along with it, just in case there wasn't too much conversation going on. Let me just add some comments right here then. So we've essentially read the first coherent section, right? It is generally true with regard to that by which things are created, that things are necessarily created out of featureless, that by which achievements are brought about, that achievements are necessarily based on the nameless. So we have a division here between things and achievements. So Wang Bi is starting to put forward a division of reality, kind of like you mentioned Neoplatonist, right? So kind of like maybe a Westerner would say form and matter. I'm not saying that what Wang Bi said matches or maps directly onto form and matter, but he's putting forward this division of the things that we can directly perceive. Some of them are going to be termed wu, or things, and some of them are going to be termed gong, or achievements. So he's got that two-part division of reality that he's starting out the essay with. And actually in Chinese, you'll encounter phrases like wan wu bai shi, which is the 10,000 things and the 100 affairs, to sum up all of reality. Now, we don't have bai shi here. We have gong instead of shi, but it's essentially similar, right? And maybe one example of how to interpret this would be, it's not necessarily Wang Bi that's going to put this forward, but wu, referring to things, maybe it can refer to people like you and me. And then the shi, or the gong, is going to refer to our relations and our social position or our honor. So not like a tangible object. So maybe you have two men, each one of them is a wu, or a thing, or an object, or an animal. And then they're brothers, right? So the fact that they're brothers is an example of shi, or gong. So again, what he's doing here is he's dividing reality into these two categories, essentially. And then he's saying, in my interpretation here, he's saying that when we speak about objects, like spatial objects or animals or things, they necessarily are created out of the featureless. Now, we haven't yet gotten to the part where we're really discussing what he means by featureless, but just keep that in mind. All these physical spatial objects, they're coming out of the featureless, or they're created by the featureless. And then we have the achievements or relationships or things. These are based on, or coming out of, I suppose, the nameless. So if we're talking about where do where does brotherhood come from? Or where do achievements come from? Well, they come from the nameless, that which doesn't have a name. Where do squares and balls and birds and things come from? Well, they come from that which doesn't have a spatial feature, or it's not an object. So I think that's a good start to the essay there. That kind of goes to your question, Spalaton. He's saying, here's reality. We're going to cut it into things and their relationships or achievements, and now we're going to talk about what created them, or what sustains them, or what's necessary for them. And that is not something that has features or a shape, and that's something that does not have a name or a relationship in that sense.
Yeah. So I'm curious about the relationship of these things, and then the relationship you just mentioned. But this really sounds like a Neoplatonic move here to trace everything back to something that has not the attributes, that is not of the things that it you cannot say produces, because it already attributes something to him, but here the strong language of negation. He's not this, and even saying he's featureless, or you could maybe even say without attributes, or even nameless. This is, in Plotinus, of course, but it gets very strong later in Proclus. So it's also funny that he's at the same time, lived at around the same time like Plotinus here.
Well, it's exciting, right? It's sort of the beginning of real, explicitly stated metaphysical systems. He's trying to put forward a really explicit account as best as he can of some metaphysical principles or ideas, or sort of context building or system building behind or beyond the various things. And Marsk, I'll let you speak, but just quickly, Spalaton as well. Obviously, Wang Bi did not meet Plotinus. They're contemporaries. Obviously, they didn't meet. But part of what Wang Bi might be doing here may be a reaction to Buddhism having come over to China. Because, Buddhists have their own metaphysical ideas and teachings. And so he and other Xuanxue scholars and other people of the period, maybe they are not Buddhists, but they want to get in that discussion, and maybe they want to put forward a clearer case or develop that thinking for themselves or in their own right. So maybe that's why it's happening at this time. And Alejandro, I see you requested speaker. Let me just approve you. Yep, there you go, Alejandro. Feel free to speak.
Yeah, just a question to see what your thoughts are on this. So, I've only dabbled in this tradition. I don't speak from any real study, but I have read a bunch of translations and texts about the Lao-Tzu, and it seems like most of the interpreters, and by this I don't mean people like Wang Bi, but the Westerners who translated it and try to present it, land on one of two, assessments of what that text is. One is that it's a kind of collection of sayings that was later on attributed to this sort of mythical figure, Lao Tzu, and the other, that there actually was an author of that name who compiled it. But in either case, neither of them think of it as what you're calling a metaphysical system, right? So it does seem, I guess I'm just trying to ask, it does seem like what you're trying to say is this is sort of Wang Bi's contribution is to, in his commentary, take up aspects of this ancient text and rewrite it so that it can be, well, as you said, for example, in dialogue with Buddhist dialectics. Am I going in the right direction here?
Yeah, now, when I say that it's in dialectic or like in some sort of competition with Buddhist works, I don't want to say that's like it's like Wang Bi said, I wrote this text in order to refute the Buddhists and build my local or my Chinese position based on pre-unification text. Like, it's not explicitly stated by Wang Bi, as far as I know. That was just my, and I've seen other secondary sources take this similar position, that's what maybe inspired him to go down this road, and other scholars to go down this road. You're right that if we asked, I think, well, I don't talk to many professors, but I do read some secondary sources, and you're right. If we went and we read some secondary sources, or we spoke to a professor, they're going to have an account of how the Tao Te Ching gets put together that does not make it sound like a very purposeful, single, coherent text pieced together by one author for purposes of putting forward a metaphysical system. I think for Wang Bi, around his time, people were debating things like who was the greatest sage of antiquity? Was it Confucius? Was it Laozi? Was it Liezi? Was it Zhuangzi? Who was the best? And so for Wang Bi, he's going to regard that there is some sort of figure, Laozi, and he's a sage, and these sayings are attributable to him, and that contained within them, if properly interpreted and brought together, there is some great truth and greatness in them. Because this is like a remote sage who's extremely highly respected. He's in tune with the Tao, or the truth, and here are his sayings. And now the commentator, like Wang Bi, can come along, read them all, and try to explicate some sort of coherent system from them, and really bring out the truth of his works. Technically, for Wang Bi, he thinks, or he claims, that Confucius is the greatest sage. There are some interesting reasons why he says that. He's not really taking a, we'll say, orthodox interpretation of Confucius, but yeah, a debate in his time is who's the greatest sage. Let's go take their works and try to interpret them and bring forward what is true and good about them. So yeah, he's trying to do that. He's trying to get the metaphysical teachings out of them, and assuming that they're great sages, and assuming that they had some connection to the Tao or the truth, he's going to elucidate their system as he interprets it. And he's going to make arguments about why that's probably what these old sages thought. Because some other people are going to come along and say, hey, look, Laozi believed in 5 elements, or the yin-yang theory, and they're going to read different theories into these fragments or these texts. You also raise an interesting point that I won't get into much, but there's a whole issue about what version of the Tao Te Ching did people have. Because, like you pointed out, these are collections of short sayings, right? Or short sections. And today we have multiple different textual traditions, I suppose, that are different from one another. And so, if we want to say, Wang Bi comments on this section of the Tao Te Ching, well, it's an open debate what his copy of the Tao Te Ching looked like as well. So there's also that part of the puzzle there. It's like, what did he even think the Tao Te Ching was? For one, he calls it the Laozi, and for two, we know that contemporary with him, there are multiple different versions of the Laozi out there. For example, there's one that's not the one that Wang Bi went off of, but it's called the He Shang Gong. So I guess that would mean the guy by the river, or the guy on the river. And basically there's a story that there was a sage living by the side of the river, and he had the one true copy of the Laozi, the Tao Te Ching, and I guess someone came and bothered him, and he gave them a copy, and he gave them a commentary. But his interest, and I haven't read it, but his particular interest was more about how to be a good hermit who has meditative practices for long life and exercises and things. Again, I haven't read it, but that's a different focus than Wang Bi. But you can see they have multiple textual traditions, and that is its own special puzzle. And if anyone does like Rudolf Wagner's work, he actually writes at length about the textual tradition, because when he translates the commentary on the Laozi, so the Laozi Zhu, he also has to get into a discussion of what did Wang Bi think the original text actually said. So that's a huge puzzle. I'm not the expert on it, and you're definitely bringing up something that is discussed at length and would be its whole other thing.
To beat upon really quickly, you mentioned something. You just now made a passing reference to like a text or a textual tradition, whatever you call it, of where they had written about health, wellness, and how to live like a virtuous life and stuff like that. What did you call it?
Yeah, okay, so backing up a bit, I mentioned that during the time of Wang Bi, like we said, okay, Han Dynasty has collapsed, it's Three Kingdoms period, it's all chaos, but I mentioned that in the past, there was this strong tradition of gathering up ancient texts, trying to preserve them, and writing commentaries on them. And so when I say writing commentary, there are many different styles and focuses. And one of the styles, or one of the main focuses for a certain group of people, was health-based stuff, like exercises, immortality potions, things to extend the life and to be like a sage in terms of your health and wellness and living like a hermit and whatever. So that's one of the commentary traditions. The guy that I mentioned, now, I haven't read that much about this guy because that side of the tradition is not something that really appeals to me. But that person is a He Shang Gong. It's going to be the guy on the river, or the guy on the side of the river. And he's a hermit. And the tradition is that he was one of the, Han Dynasty guys who gave a copy of the Tao Te Ching to the emperor. I guess, someone was bothering him, and he gave them a copy of the Tao Te Ching and said, here, go read this, here's my commentary. And then he flew up into the sky and disappeared. So, do I think a guy flew up into the sky and disappeared? Probably not, but I don't know. Maybe he's really good at Taoism. But he is the source of one of the textual traditions. But that's a different textual tradition than the one that Wang Bi is using. And again, yes, if you want to go into Taoist health rituals and things, maybe look up He Shang Gong. And, there's a lot of texts. There's a lot. So go check that stuff out. But you're not going to find that really in here. So in Wang Bi's 老子微指略例, we're not going to be talking about, breathing exercises and being a hermit. Although, maybe it'll be fun to be a hermit, but not for Wang Bi. And he wouldn't know much about immortality. He died at 23 or something. So, All right. Alejandro, Musk, any other questions or points? I know that was a long answer, but that's really a set of really interesting and complicated issues with the ancient Chinese works.
I'm good for now. I think we should read some more Twitter from it.
Yeah. Okay. So we split the work in. We split reality into a Wu and a Gong. So things and their achievements, and we said that the things are created out of the featureless, and the achievements are brought about from the nameless. So we're going to go to section 6 now, because we read 1 to 5. And so section 6, the featureless and nameless is what the Laozi calls the ancestor of the 10,000 kinds of things or entities. Being featureless, it neither warms nor cools. Being nameless, it neither lets sound forth the notes gong or shang. Even when listening for it, one is still unable to hear it. Even when looking for it, one is still unable to perceive it. Even when groping for it, one is still unable to identify it. Even when going after its taste, one is still unable to get its flavor. Now, I'm going to pause there just quickly, not just to see if there are comments, but also just to make a few observations of my own first. When we were reading the first part, we pointed out that the featureless applies to things and the nameless applies to achievements. But in section 6, it says, the featureless and nameless is what the Laozi calls the ancestor of the 10,000 kinds of entities. And what's important here And Spalaton, this may interest you because this is where we're going to make it one. It's no longer featureless applying to things and nameless applying to achievements. It's actually saying the featureless and nameless as one thing. So the featureless and the nameless is in reference to the same thing, whatever it is. Whatever this otherness is, featureless and nameless applies to it. They're not two separate othernesses. And of course, because they are the creation of the things and because they are the way achievements are brought about, they're the ancestor of the 10,000 kinds of entities. So I'm going to look at the Chinese here quickly, see if I can find it. Here we go. So we got Wu Xing, Wu Ming, Zhe. So that which is without features and without name. So it's one thing. Wan Wu. So again, the 10,000 things. Zhi Zong Ye. So it's the ancestor of the 10,000 things. So it's basically one thing that is without name, without features, and it is the ancestor of the 10,000 things. Spalaton, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts here. Again, from the Neoplatonic perspective. So Proclus makes brings three types of negations. He distinguished between them. I would argue you can find them already in Plato, but it's Proclus who more or less systemizes it. And what you have first, I think this is the negation you would agree with your philosophical position, that you have the negation of to distinguish between things within the realm of being. You have the negation of privation, where when you say something is not, that this is what you not agree upon, that it is really non-being. So you can picture it goes downwards into pure privation or absolute privation. And the third negation, and this is what I think is important here, is the negation of transcending. So you say something is not, but you don't mean it does not exist, but it is above all these things that exist. It produces them without having the attributes of the things it produces. And this is then classically attributed in not really attributed to the one, but this is how Neoplatonics try to describe the absolute, the one. And I think this is important here, not to because a lot of people mistake it. Schopenhauer, for example, makes the mistake to bring them together, but you can clearly see here with the phrasing of ancestor of all these things that when you negate the thing, the featureless or nameless, that it is not meant that it does not exist, so negation of privation, but it is a negation that transcends being. And the other thing here also, it's also from the neo perspective, but very similar, that the one often is described as transcending contradictions. And you see it here then with cold and warm, also contradictions is usually played within Platonism. You have stasis and mobility, and the one is the thing that transcends the contradictions, or the parts that contradict each other, but also at the same time, and does not share their attributes, but also at the same time produces them, or is the origin of them. So just these two remarks here, also very, from a Neoplatonic perspective, very similar.
Yeah, I think you will enjoy the observation I was about to share. You actually noted yourself just now. You pointed out the warm and the cool, and the other side, of course, is the gong and the shang notes. I wanted to take a moment just to show how the text is now describing or distinguishing this otherness or oneness, the featureless and nameless. Because in the start we said there is a featureless and there is a nameless. And then we said, the featureless and nameless is one. And now we're getting to a part where we're trying to carve out a place for it or trying to describe it more. And what they've done is focused again on that. You basically said this yourself, Spalaton, but the first bit about hot and cold, and then the gong and shang notes, the featureless cannot be defined as hot or cold, because if the featureless was specifically hot, then that would exclude cold. And if the featureless was cold, it would exclude hot. But of course, the featureless needs to be the thing that creates them. Because again, the featureless, as we heard in the beginning, was that by which things are created. And again, the nameless cannot be the gong note, and it cannot be the shang note, because it needs to give rise or bring about all of the notes. And if it's just defined by one of the notes, then it can't be the others. So again, he's gone a little further in this section and added some more detail, or kind of giving a place, or at least showing what it is not. And so I think you basically grabbed the most important part of this section, and that's the part that really stood out to me as well. And we're actually going to find that he speaks more about that when we continue to read. It's really a hint at where he's going to go with this. But Mask, feel free to talk.
Yeah, so the thing that I find interesting, right, is in this entire, I'm not going to describe it as circuitous because it wraps around itself. And I think a lot of what is being discussed is the features of non-dualistic reality. The reason I describe it that way is because the non-dualistic nature of reality and the oneness of everything that exists, it has very specific names, very specific descriptions, and there are multiple specific derivations of reality's current condition that come from the formless, infinite, eternal. And those exist entirely within, Hindu canon is what they call it. But it is essentially just the Yoga Sutras, which describe the Yoga Sutras and the Advaita Vedantins, who are the non-dualistic, monistic, theists who describe and flesh out this philosophy in about the first 300 years of this millennium as well in the Indian subcontinent. And the featureless thing that you're describing, we have a name for it. We call it Brahman, which permeates reality, constitutes all of it, but it circumscribes everything but is not bound by anything, which is that formless, eternal, infinite, beyond name, beyond any dualistic descriptions. It is neither male nor female, but something higher. From it derives maleness, from it derives femaleness, from it derives the sort of masculine energy spirit and the feminine energy spirit, but they end up they are tributaries that end up in this one river, which is the ultimate nature of reality, and it is what lies beyond all physical descriptions and all physical experiences of reality. And the path of yoga is how you transcend physical reality and eventually get to a point where you can perceive the non-duality or the non-dualistic nature of the universe as a whole.
Right, so when we continue to read, we'll see something similar to what you just said there. When you said that all these rivers go back to the, I forget the word, he said Brahman or something, but essentially he's going to say that this featureless, nameless is a sort of a root, right, that everything is generated by and is nourished by and goes, kind of returns to it when it's destroyed or dies. So yes, he is going to be talking about something similar to that, and he's going to be rather explicit about it. He'll use a term that is different. He's going to call it the mother, and in being the mother, it's both sort of the root and the thing that gives birth to something, but it's also, for Wang Bi, kind of something that sustains it. Just like a mother may nurse a child, this Tao or this Wan Wu Zhi Mu, the mother of the 10,000 things, or the dark feminine. It's going to also have a sustenance role, and things are going to succeed as they work in accord with her or are close to her. And so she has more than strictly a derivative role. It also has a way of being the sustenance, keeping things in existence, and also allowing them to succeed. But different authors debate and disagree about how that goes. We're just going to see how Wang Bi handles with it, and he does talk about it in this text. Spalaton, I see your hand up again. Feel free.
Yeah, very quick answering to Mask here. From what I've heard from you, I would detect, however, some differences to Platonism or Neoplatonism. I think they would not that easily say that, for example, masculine and feminine, that there are even such things. If they were, then the feminine would be, in a sense, derivative of the masculine, and that would even be sort of wrong if you look closely to the text of Plato. He kind of describes the nous, so the thing before the one or the good, as more in a masculine way, whereas the matter or ananka or necessity is more described in a feminine way. So it's not like the contradictions or the duality is symmetric in that sense. There's a big asymmetric built into his thought, and of course it is much more nuanced, not just with the distinction between the sensible realm and the forms, but even within that you have numbers and everything, and it's not just everything lumped together and then the one transcends just everything. I'm not saying that what you just described that is that, but it's much more detailed and certainly asymmetrical in a sense. Just want to mention this.
Yeah, I think it is always worth remembering that these thinkers do have real differences. There are different models put forth, even just looking at the Chinese tradition alone, or just within Xuanxue. Different authors really do have different ways of building these models. They're not all in agreement. They do have real differences. I don't want to get into examples. Maybe if we have time, but for example, Wang Bi right here is saying that things are created out of this featureless and nameless, right? There's another Xuanxue scholar that's going to say that things exist in their own right and don't have a master above them that they are created from and sustained in existence by. So there really are some very different interpretations of the Tao by these various authors, and there's some argument or discussion about what term should be used for the highest principle. Tao for some authors or in some texts is not really going to be the one ultimate source of everything or sustainer of everything. The Tao may just refer to existing in accordance with some principles or some general principles, but there's something even beyond that. Maybe it's the Tai Chi or the One or whatever. So really, even the hierarchy will switch up depending on these thinkers. So it really is a lot of stuff to look into. I wouldn't try to take the Taoists and say that they're consistent, or they definitely have plenty of their own debates. But anyway, those were the bits I pulled out of the text, and Spalaton, I think you pulled out the same parts. So I'll move to the next section here. Starting at 13, we have, that is why the Laozi says about the Tao. As a thing, it completes out of the diffuse. As an image, it is without form. As a sound, it has an inaudible tone. As a taste, it is without flavor. That is why it is able to be the principle and the master. of all different categories of entities to cover and permeate heaven and earth, so that there is nothing that it does not thread through. For the fact is, would it be warming, then it would not be able to cool. For the fact is, would it be tied to letting sound forth the note gong, then it would not be able to let sound forth the note shang. This is because a form necessarily has something that specifies it. A note necessarily has a place in the scale to which it belongs. So I'll stop it there because there's a number of things that really stood out to me. But first of all, Spalaton, you'll probably appreciate that end bit there because he's spoken further about hot and cold, gong and shang notes, and he said, it can't, if it was warming, it wouldn't be able to be cool. And if it was focused on sounding out that one note, it wouldn't be able to sound out the others. It has to be somehow beyond or contextual to these particular details that are mutually exclusive, like hot and cold. It also said the featureless and nameless is the master and principle. So we've now got an affirmation of sort of a authority, at least, or a kind of a hierarchy. So this is maybe people just assume this would be the case, but we now know that it's not lightly said that it creates the other things. Now we know it really is a superior thing in the hierarchy. It's the master and the principle, and the other things are coming forward from it. Their success relies on it, etc. So this, I think, is a really, maybe the first part in the text where he's giving it authority or hierarchical superiority. And Spalaton, I'll call on you, but just one of the last things I would say here is I read the section where it said it is the principle and the master of all different categories of entities to cover and permeate heaven and earth so that there is nothing that it does not thread through. So the featureless and nameless is also being described as having some degree of omnipresence, right? Because there is nothing that it does not thread through. Now, it isn't literally them, it's threading through them, but it has some degree of omnipresence. So we know that it has hierarchical superiority or seniority. We know as well now that it threads through all things. The Chinese is actually, let's see if we've got it here. Here we go. All right, so 故能为品无之宗诸. Okay, yeah. 包通天地. So 包通天地 is going to mean, 包通 means to be, like a bao is to wrap around something or to envelop something. And tong means to go through something or pass through something. And tian di is heaven and earth. So 包通天地 is sort of like it envelops and it permeates or goes through heaven and earth. So that's what has been translated there as nothing that it does not thread through. So it envelops and it goes through it. So it's sort of an omnipresence. So I think that's another interesting point or development in the text. Spalaton, go ahead and feel free to speak.
Yeah, is it okay if I comment? I don't want to take much of your time here commenting on this text. I make it quick. To the first thing you just mentioned with respect to that it is not just that he kind of revises it, what he said before about the creating part, that it is much more a principle or master. And there's this whole debate about Plato's Timaeus, if this is really to be understood as a creation ex nihilo in the even Christian sense, or if he held the position that the world is eternal. And some also think about Neoplatonism, especially with the term emanation, that you have here, like in a sense, almost a timely sort of creation, an emanation from the one creating, in a sense, all the different realms, nous, soul, and so on. But a lot of Neoplatonists I know would argue against this top-down thinking and would rather emphasize that it is much more a relationship of dependence, of ontological or logical dependence. So in other words, that you have the things in front of you, and in order to make sense of them, you presuppose the higher realms, leading back to the highest principle. So it is much more this kind of reasoning here instead of this creational ex nihilo thought within especially Neoplatonism. And what was the other part you just mentioned? Being a kind of immanent. This is also an interesting move in the Neoplatonic thought, that they, on the one hand, they emphasize this very radical transcendence of the one, transcending even being, but also emphasizing that it permeates everything, they argue, because you can only think of everything as a unity, and thereby kind of reflecting to the unity as such, to the one. Everything you experience within the manifold, even the manifold as such, you can only think and experience as a closed unity, and also all the different parts within the manifold. So they argue with that kind of reason that in this sense the one is everywhere present, because everything, if you sharpen your like intellectual sense, you can grasp this unity and then lead it back to the one. I'm not sure if that made sense, but this is also a move to counter this thought that that the highest principle is somewhere transcendent, has nothing to do with us, and they try to counter this with no, it's very intimate and near to us, and also try to argue against this distinction of transcendence and immanence. But it also sounds very similar. I stop here. I have another thought.
So maybe one of the ways to explain the different approaches or slightly different ideas here is that Taoism, of course, is heavily rooted in language of change, or things being in flux. And so the idea of this principle as being completely separated from us and unchanging and nothing to do with us is sort of not viable in Taoism at all, because, of course, things are constantly coming in and generation and then passing away. And of course, it is by the being able to detect the general system or the Tao and following along with its shape or its nature or way that one can succeed, for someone like Wang Bi. And so, it's the Tao or the Xuan or whatever this principle is that is nameless and featureless is a lot more intimate, simply because it's so tied up in language of change, and language of how things are created and how things pass away and how things can succeed and how things will fail or die.
It's more accurate to describe it as Taoism, or like the descriptions of the discussions of the Tao always deal with the eternal transience of the Tao as it shifts from one form to the other, and it passes into every like subsequent form and how that affects everything around it and stuff like that.
Well, it kind of assumes that the way you describe it is almost like reality is just Tao, and so it's all just one thing and it takes different shapes. I don't know if that's the only way. Well, it's certainly not the only way that a Taoist could think about it. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with, say, Anaximander, right? So he says is the apeiron, and things will come forward to it from it, and then things will return to it, giving payment for any outrage. So the elements can come out of the apeiron. They will then form the various elements and form various things, and then they'll break down and they'll return to the apeiron. So, they came forth in some sort of outrage, and now in justice they pay back and return to the unlimited. Is the Tao like the apeiron there? Obviously, the Tao has some other functions, because the Tao is also nourishing that which currently exists, and is also some sort of rule set or shape of reality that if you recognize it, you can succeed, or your plans will succeed, rather than someone who focuses on things that they can touch and feel and doesn't understand the bigger picture. So it's not quite like Anaximander, but that I'm using Anaximander because I wanted to give a demonstration where the Tao or the apeiron is not really everything. It kind of is, because things come from it, but there's this clear distinction.
Yeah, but that is basically the principle of the great Tao, as in the great way, and the infinite Taos that emerge from it and merge into it over a period of time. Right? In that things emerge from the Tao, they are formed, they have a life cycle, and then they dissipate back into the Tao. But the Tao itself, as in the thing that governs all of these things happening, all of these changes happening, is fixed. And there is like a heavenly Tao and a demonic Tao, and both of them sort of merge back into the great Tao. So every path you take, it...
The idea of a heavenly Tao and a demonic Tao and the like. Here, let's put it this way. If we are just trying to say...
The only way I was describing it is like a plus Tao, as in the one which you described. Like there is a great Tao, as in the heavenly Tao, which if you align with it, things go well for you. And there is one where there's a path of difficulty, which if you're able to transcend it, you will still reach the great Tao, but it is a different path. That's the way I was describing it. Not in like, it's like virtue. I was not making a virtue-wise distinction. I was making like a path distinction between the paths.
Okay, yeah. I don't necessarily want to say that your interpretation is not one possible. I mean, it may even well be a popular one for Taoism. I would just leave it there. I would just say it's not the only way to kind of craft these systems, but I think you already know that. Spalaton, anything to add?
Yeah, just very quick. It's maybe also a big difference with respect to Platonism. There's this very famous line towards the end of the Republic where Socrates says, for the bad, one should not look at God or look for at God, but should look for other causes. So emphasizing here, you could say maybe that God produces the cool as he produces at the same time the warm, but when it comes to the opposites of good and bad, that wouldn't be here the case, that God produces in an active sense, especially the bad. And this is also a reason, as a side note, why Christians were in antiquity could easily adopt this view. Especially the sentence I mentioned became sort of a sententia, and you read it in the Church Fathers, that God is not the author and cause of the bad. So Plato has here a second principle, and Aristotle in his metaphysics kind of also characterizes this in a sort of way. It's not dualistic, on the other hand, but I just wanted to mention that just because God transcends, or the one transcends opposites, it doesn't mean he is even in the slightest somehow the cause. I think you see this also in the Statesman, that this is a view Plato always tries to reject.
Yeah. Oh, I have a request as well for a microphone here. Hold on. Here we go. Spalaton, were you still speaking? Have I glitched out, or are you okay?
No, I'm okay.
Okay. Sorry, I looked away to let nobody in. Nobody, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Spalatin was saying about good and evil being fundamentally different from other distinctions. And he was talking about Plato, and later Plotinus sort of, in my opinion, perfected Plato's philosophy on that particular subject. And the idea is that evil is fundamentally negation and a privation of being. And so anything that exists has a positive ontological existence. Whereas evil, the existence of evil is incredibly difficult to talk about because it consists in taking away things that exist. But because of that, you can quite literally say that evil does not exist because its very nature is to take away and to remove existence. And if it was to go all the way, there would ultimately be nothing left for it to remove, and therefore it itself would not exist.
All right, well, I disagree with absolutely everything you said, but let's go back to Wang Bi, because I don't want to debate the incoherence of trying to say that there is and is not, that is somehow the negation of what is. But I'm sure you have very good arguments for it, and we'll take it up in another space. But so we were at
we can turn this into a college-filled discussion again.
What's that, Spalton? Oh, that was masks.
Yeah, like I've been in a lot of these like college-level philosophy discussions, which become too like strenuous for me to participate in because people start going in negations and privations all around the place.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, Musk. If you're saying that negation itself is very problematic and leads people into these incoherent positions that basically render everything else they have to say worthless. But out of respect to nobody, I know that that's not really something I'm proving here right now. I'm just kind of announcing it to nobody. But in fairness to me, nobody just kind of said Plotinus perfected discussions of evil by saying that, well, I won't mock him. So he probably has very good reasons to believe that. Going to, sorry, nobody. Going to 21, I think is where we were at. I'm going to read from 21 to 28, and then we'll pick it back up. Here we go. Let me bring the phone a little closer to me. That is why, according to the Laozi, an image that has taken on form is not the great image. A sound that has taken on a note is not the great sound. If, however, the four images did not take on form, then the great image would have nothing in which to shine forth. The five sounds did not take on notes, then the great sound would have nothing in which to come about. Thus, when the four images take on form, and beings have nothing else by which they are dominated, then the great image shines forth. Thus, when the five sounds take on notes, and the minds have nothing else which interferes with them, then the great sound comes about. And so, I would stop there because I think we've kind of reached a new point in his thinking, or raised almost another topic here. It's now gone from our discussion of, I want to say what the featureless and nameless is, because obviously he's trying to say it's something beyond particulars. But he's now discussing, in my opinion, how this featureless and nameless might reach its sort of height, or its greatest manifestation, or its full expression. So, it sounds like the greatest expression of the things, or the Wu, is the great image, and the highest expression of the achievements, or the Gong, is the great sound. So now he's going to be discussing, what that involves. Like, how do we bring about this arrangement or situation where this xuan, or this Dao, or this principle that we can't really describe or touch, reaches its sort of its height, or its full expression. Now, as a note, you'll see that he says at 25, the four images did not take on form, then the great image would have nothing in which to shine forth. Why 4 images? I don't think anybody really knows. I've seen a few guesses in secondary source material. One guess is that it's a reference to 4 elements: metal, wood, fire, and water. So basically, if there was no metal, wood, fire, or water, then there would be no spatial objects for the formless to shine forth through. Another guess is that it refers to, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Book of Changes yet, but there were essays attached to it, sort of appendices. And one of them has a quote, and it says, "The ultimate generates the..." Oh, hold on. Yeah, one of my kids is invading the room. The essay says, "The ultimate generates the yin and the yang, and the yin and the yang generates the 4 images." So there's a couple of possibilities on why he picked 4 images there. But basically, I think he's showing us now, or explaining to us now, how this Tao, or this mysterious thing, can reach its full expression in the world. And so my interpretation is that if all the unique examples are brought forth and exist or are present together and don't interfere or dominate or destroy each other, then the great image and the great sound are perfected or made manifest in the world. So when all the notes can sound out in their proper harmony or place, when all the various animals are able to go out and do their thing, then this featureless and nameless, the other, is sort of at its height and has full expression in the world. That's where I think he's going with that. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. I think I'm way off. But I think that the text at this point has not taken a bad turn, but it's gone and it's treading new ground at this section. It's relating the other, or the formless and nameless, and how it can reach its full expression in the world, or how it can be made manifest in its greatest capacity, for everything to be present and everything to kind of shine forth. All the possibilities shine forth. But if anyone has any comments, feel free to put your hand up. Otherwise, I will continue.
Do you have any suggestions what the great image is, or the great sound? Or
my understanding of the great image or the great sound. So he says, if, however, the 4 images did not take on form, then the great image would have nothing in which to shine forth. Okay, so let's pretend that the 4 images are the elements. Whatever I said those were: metal, wood, fire, and water. So what he's saying is, if there is present metal, wood, fire, and water, and I suppose then the great image can shine forth, because you have the 4 elements, and now it can shine forth. And what would it mean to shine forth? I'm thinking it means that they form all the possible arrangements, or all the possible things, or all the possible animals. Just like with the great sound. What is the great sound? Well, the great image is supposed to be the featureless thing. The great sound is also supposed to be that featureless, nameless thing. And that's sort of the system that can allow the two, it can allow all the mutually exclusive or unique things to come forth or be created. And so if the great sound is shining forth, then all the things that the great sound can create will be present. So all the different notes will be playing in their harmony. Like one note will not drown out all the others. And if the great image shines forth, well, the great image is this thing that can create all of the particular things. And so if it's shining forth, I guess it's creating all the particular things. They're all present. And they're not just one thing dominating all the others or whatnot. They're all fully expressed in the world. But go on, Spalaton.
Yeah, I'm not sure on this one, but it kind of argues backwards, like a Platonist would. The 4 elements would be in the hierarchy of a Platonist, the level just before the matter, if you take even such, but it would be very low. So they cannot be like the first in place. It is much rather the opposite, that the great image is already present, and the elements come at last, in a sense. So it would be the other way around here. But maybe I'm erring.
Yeah, no, it's notice, and maybe you're right, and maybe I'm the one who's confused. But notice it says would have nothing in which to shine forth, and so when it shines forth, I guess, what is it? So it's not that it's not present. Like the great image is there. Obviously, the other, or the featureless and nameless, is there. It's not gone away or anything. But what does it mean for it to shine forth? The way I'm reading it is sort of it's shining forth into the world. And so what does that look like? And to me, I think I just interpret it as having its full expression in the world. So if the featureless and nameless is supposed to be able to create all these things, then when it shines forth into the world, in some sort of like the highest sense or the most manifest sense, then I think it should be described as all of the possibilities being in the world, because it's shining forth, it's all there. Whereas if there was no wood, water, metal, fire, or whatever, then it wouldn't be shining forth. There would be no embodiment, or nothing would be instantiated. Or if there was just one note, someone banging on a drum, and it drowns out all the other notes, then it's not really, the great sound, because only one small part of it is instantiated in the world. So I don't think he's saying that the great image and the great sound are like destroyed or go away or don't exist. Just that he's talking about their expression in the world, the shining forth. But again, it's not like Wang Bi actually said that explicitly. That's me trying to read my meaning into it, I guess. But yeah, if you have any other comments, let me know. Otherwise, I'll move on to 29 to 36. Oh, we have a request for a mic. Here we go. Nobody. We have the... Oh, no. I don't know if you're here or not, nobody. Keep disappearing. But if you have any comments, feel free to speak. I will not discriminate against partisans of non-being, at least not for now.
I'm not a partisan of non-being just because my name is Nobody. I want to make that clear. I'm just a fan of Homer.
All right. Did you have any comments on the great image or the great sound, or I'll just stop with that?
I just kept thinking about Om in Hinduism, which is, it's this single kind of tone that is the ground of everything, that everything emerges from. That's what kept popping into my head.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know that much about Hinduism, but if the Om is supposed to be like the sum total of reality and everything, maybe the great... Yeah, then maybe the great image is maybe I'm sort of describing the same thing then, because the great image shining forth would be all possibility being present in the world, because the great image is present in all of its glory or complexity.
Yeah, it seems to me it's like the great image, this could be completely wrong, but the great image kind of comes like at the finality or summation of the process that begins with the great sound. It's like the complete shining forth of everything that has emerged from that, and you can see sort of the universal in the particular.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess, I do have two new speakers. We got Fuzzy and Sacred. Sacred went to the extra trouble of putting his hand up, so we'll start with Sacred.
It's a little early for me to comment. We're going into interesting space, but if I understand correctly, it resonates. What you're talking about is what I could study in metaphysics is the universal, all capitals, like where all universals and particulars reside, which is in Platonic terms. God is the good, so God is good, God is beautiful, God is true, in metaphysical terms, code, goodness, beauty, and truth is the eternal, which makes it objective, and everything else is subjective in this reality we call. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to, because we're just starting, but I think that's what, and it makes sense to me, because that is what everyone is trying. All philosophical texts and that really get deep into thought and trying to articulate that which is unarticulate, which is beyond form and words. But what they're speaking of is the universal, and there are many ways to describe it. You were saying an image, yet it is the image, and we're a copy of the image. So I'll leave it be, and I hope we have an interesting conversation. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Fozzie, you've got your hand up now as well, so I guess I have to let you speak. Go ahead.
Thanks, mate. I'm just going to say this real quick and then jump back down to listener. Just wanted to carry on to what nobody had put forth. So, there's obviously the one that everyone knows is just OM, but in Hinduism, in Sanskrit, it's AUM. So the A that makes up Om is the representation of the waking state. U is the dream state, and M is the dream, the deep sleep state. But all combined within the Rig Veda, it describes Om being the primordial sound that birthed the universe, which is not all that different from when you look at the Old Testament about the Word of God, the breath of life. It's very, very, very similar. So that's what I will say, and then I will jump down to listener.
Thank you. I feel like every single tradition is getting mentioned today. It's sometime in antiquity, these ideas just somehow spread across the whole world, and everyone. It's they didn't meet with each other. Obviously, Wang Bi didn't meet Plotinus. He didn't read the Old Testament, and vice versa. But somehow they're all touching on something in their own way.
But that's what makes it universal. That's why I was able to speak. That is what the universal is. The universal God. It is the universal. So if it is the universal, it will translate and resonate with all peoples through all times, through all civilizations. That's what it means to be sacred. So I'll leave it at that.
But, I don't want to get into a debate about it, but essentially, you're right, there is to some degree universality, because we are all in existence, right? We all have being. So being is common to all things. But when we talk about the sacred or the God and all that, there's countless amounts of disagreements. And so I think there's a lot of, not blood to be shed, but a lot of words to be exchanged back and forth, and a lot of problematic arguments and failings, because yes, we're universal in the sense that your reality is being. It is one big thing. So we're all connected in that sense, but
that's not what I'm talking about. The universal goes way higher than that. This is a genuine sacred teaching that they don't teach. But this is when again. Anyway, I'll let's carry on, brother.
Yeah, if they don't teach it, we better not break that tradition, right? So we'll carry on. We'll maintain that tradition of not teaching it. On where were we at? 29 to 36. Let's see here. All right. That is why the Laozi says, if the ruler were to hold on to the great image, then all under heaven would come to him. That is why the Laozi says, if a ruler were to make use of the great sound, then the customs and habits would change for the better. As it is the formless, that is, shining forth, although all under heaven is coming to him, this coming to, they, the people, would not be able to explain. As it is the toneless that is coming about, although the customs and habits do change for the better, this change the people are not able to analyze. Thus, heaven creates the five things, but it is a no thing that brings about their usefulness. Thus, the sage spreads the five teachings, but it is no words that bring about the improvement. So here we've gone from what we were just discussing about the 4 images and the 5 sounds, where we're talking about the featureless and nameless having its full expression in reality as the great image and the great sound. Now we are going directly into politics, which is always, it's always been a big part of Chinese texts in antiquity. It's sort of advising the emperor. It's not the only thing they talk about, but there's always there's almost always some angle that involves government or governing or how to behave and organize things. And so now we've kind of gone right into that. So we have political advice, and specifically, it stems from understanding the metaphysics that we've been explaining. So if a ruler understands the featureless and nameless, he'll be able to arrange all the particulars correctly, or at least he'll understand how they all work together and can kind of adjust them so that a better order or whatever he wants is brought around. One thing that's interesting is you'll see in 32 and 33, it says that even though things are getting better, the people aren't able to explain why. And in 33, even though the customs and habits are changing for the better, again, they're not able to analyze it. And so, when the ruler is sort of using the Tao or is governing in accordance with these broader principles, we've already said these broader principles are not something that we detect or experience. Like, we don't just touch them or anything. And so maybe it's because the ruler is not dealing in sort of direct action or saying, I favor this musical note over the other, or I favor merchants over farmers. Because he's not being so direct, because he's not doing it, they can't really tell why things are getting better, and they can't be angry about it. I think one of the fears of, and this is kind of going off on a tangent, but one of the fears of Taoist or with governance in general is, let's say you don't like people who grow apples, and so you make it illegal to grow apples. Then you go into the fields and you burn all the apples. You're going to make a lot of people angry. And they're going to know you did it because you are favoring this specific thing, a tangible thing. You're making this clear policy and you're getting active in the world. But if the ruler really just wants there to be no apples, but he's capable with the Tao or with the featureless and the nameless, then he can kind of indirectly bring about an environment where apples can't survive, and then nobody will plant them. So maybe there's a disease or a blight on apples somewhere, and he introduces it. Now, obviously, people could figure out it's him, but if they didn't, people just wouldn't plant apples, and he'd have his way, and nobody would even look at the emperor. He didn't really do anything. And even more so, if he's a good emperor, he's not only going to know how to affect things by being in accordance with the Tao, but he's also not going to be a partisan himself. So he's making things better, and I think he's making them better by organizing them in a way that sort of the great image and the great sound ring forth, because everything is able to express itself and be harmonious, and he can make this ideal environment. And nobody can really point to why things are getting better, but they're just getting better because he understood the nature of reality and ordered things that way without being too obvious or direct about it or trying to force it. He didn't force it. He just changed the environment so that it naturally came about. So of course that's, I'm doing a lot of editorial. I'm basically reading a lot of my own thoughts into the text, or my own understanding of Taoism into the text, but that's what I think we see here. So if anyone has any comments, please jump in. But I wanted to stop it there because I saw that they've gone from the expression of the Tao in reality to a political example of ruling in accordance with it. And when you do rule in accordance with it, things get better. But people don't really, they're not going to blame or praise the emperor for it. It just kind of happens. It's just natural. And nobody gets in trouble and no one gets praised for it. Kind of the emperor's working behind the scenes, so to speak. Sacred, you got your hand up. Feel free to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to say is the correlation between this Chinese text and Western philosophy is how it starts. The sages, the wise men start discussing about what is good and so forth, maybe more spiritual, philosophical things, but how naturally it jumps over to politics. That's what I got with this transition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it's a feature of Chinese texts, I think. So I don't read that many Han Dynasty texts, or this is immediate post Han. I like pre-unification texts, but it's present there as well. It just seems to be a very long tradition of discussing certain topics like the Tao or whatever, and then also advising the emperor or governing body on how to do certain things in accordance with principles that have just been spoken about. There's always this sort of political advisory role, and I think maybe it's because a lot of these scholars, they're at court as well, or they're advisors to ministers or to emperors or kings. But nobody.
If I could frame it, is the philosophical part is for the one, but the universal. The universality of it is you look at what is good for the one, and then of course you want to apply it to the many. And when you talk about the many, it obviously goes into the domain of politics. So that's what I was saying. I think what's Plato's got the Republic, Aristotle's got the politics, if I'm correct. And so here it just seems to be a universal, natural process to go from when wise sages speak of something, they start with the one, what is good for the one, and then what is good for the many, and of course then you want to influence the politicians and so forth. So that's all I was trying to bring. That was the connection that I got out of that immediately.
Great. Nobody, you got your hand up. Feel free to jump in and go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, but I think anybody who's listening should check out Ezra Pound's cantos, because he has about 10 cantos in there that are exactly what you described. It's a narrative about Chinese history and about how Chinese history goes exactly as you said in this series, where when the emperor understands the Tao, everything, he works everything out, and then another emperor kind of comes back and things fall apart, etc., etc. But this itself is also seen as like an operation of the Tao on an even larger level, the way that civilization alters between having good and bad leaders.
Yeah, it's yeah. Let's you know what? We're actually right near the end of the text too, so this is great because I have to go pick my kid up from camp soon. So I'm going to read through from 37 to 48, which is going to end the text. I'm not going to be able to do an after discussion space or anything like that because I'm going to have to jump in the car and go. But going from 37 to 38, it'll be the end of section 1. So that is why the Lao-Tzu says, a way that can be spoken of is not the eternal way. A name that can be named is not the eternal name. The mother of the 5 things is neither hot nor cold, neither soft nor hard. The mother of the 5 teachings is neither bright nor dark, neither compassionate nor harsh. Although old and new are not the same, the times have changed and the habits differ. She has not changed. This is what the Lao-Tzu calls, from antiquity to the present, her name has not disappeared. If heaven would not rely on her, then beings would not be created. If government would not rely on her, then achievements would not be brought about. Therefore, as antiquity and present are connected, and as end and beginning have the same structure, it is possible for a sage ruler holding on to antiquity to regulate occurrences of the present. And taking the present as evidence, he has something by which to cognize the oldest beginning, is what the Lao-Tzu styles the eternal. And it has neither a bright nor a dark appearance, a warming nor a cooling feature. That is why the Lao-Tzu says, having knowledge of this eternal means being enlightened. In the creation of beings, in the completion of achievements, there is nothing that is not based on this eternal. That is why the Laozi says, by means of it, one discerns the beginning of the many. And that is the end of the first section or chapter, or zhang. Actually, the original text, I don't believe it's separated into zhang, but in its edition, they put it into 6 sections. So we have successfully gone through the whole first section. I guess in terms of comments on that last section there, 37 until the end, which was actually 51, we do have that direct quote from the Tao Te Ching, or from the Laozi, that everyone knows. It's literally, Dao Ke Dao, Fei Chang Dao, and Ming Ke Ming, Fei Chang Ming. So everyone knows that part. It's interesting how he split the Dao and the name. So, at 38, he says, a way that can be spoken of is not the eternal way. And then in this grammatical structure, we would read it this way. We would say 37, that is why the Laozi says. 38, a way that can be spoken of is not the eternal way. 40, the mother of the 5 things is neither hot nor cold, neither soft nor hard. And then we could do 37, that is why the Laozi says. 39, a name that can be named is not the eternal name. So you see they kind of he split the Tao Te Ching as well into this grammatical structure. Also, you see he's saying mother now. So the mother of the 5 things, the mother of the 5 teachings. So I think we, not in reading the text, but in discussing the text earlier in this space, we mentioned that mother could be interpreted as the root or the ancestor, and also as something nourishing. Just like a mother, may nurse a baby, the mother or the Tao or the formless and nameless also kind of nourishes or sustains everything in existence. And he's also now explicitly saying something that we didn't see earlier, at least not spelt out, is that the mother is unchanging. So the root or the mother or the eternal principles, they're unchanging. And also they're present at every time, regardless of the time or the situation. So I think he's also added something more there as well to his description of the formless and nameless. And then right at the end there, he also does something that maybe we'll like, which is he's connecting antiquity and the present. Because antiquity and the present are both linked to this common root. And so because they're both linked to this common root or common mother, this sustaining force or principle, we can also kind of, I don't want to say time travel, but we can kind of appreciate what antiquity was like as well, because we both share the same root. And so we can apply the ancient lessons to today, and I suppose we can take examples from today in our attempts to understand what the past was like, because we know that even though we're distinct, the ancient time and the present time, every time is distinct from another, but with the common root there, we can have these common lessons, we can look to these ancient sages. There is that thread that runs through it all, Bao Tong Tian Di. So, I think every single section in here that we've read through, now I've broken it down myself, it's not really broken down in this translation, but we can see how he's developed the argument, or at least developed the account, constantly adding more and more to it as the text progresses. And I like the way it's ended here and just kind of tied antiquity to the present, and has made it clear that the nameless and formless is a mother and a root, and that it's unchanging, and everything stems from it. So yeah. Any thoughts from anyone else? That is the end of the first section, and like I said, I have to dash in a little bit, but I'm glad we actually got through it. For a while there, I was worried that we wouldn't be able to. Sacred, go ahead and say something.
I'll keep it short, but you verified and validated my whole synthesis is about the universal. But I take it from a Platonic view, but I use the language of Plato, God is beyond form and words. So In metaphysics, the primary principle of metaphysics is contradiction. So we know God is beyond form and words, but what do? We create millions of words over time and space to try to describe God. Let's not use the word God, the universal, in the sense that this is what he's talking about. You can't give it a name. And there's a really good video from Alan Watts where he talks about this, and we won't give it. He takes a bong. We won't give it a name. See, words are really great. Words are sacred, language is sacred, but it can only take us so far. And once we start putting a label on something, we limit the concept's potential. So I understand this as again the universal from an Eastern perspective. They're saying the same thing as what the Western metaphysics and philosophy is talking about, except one would use God as a symbol, and the other one is just maybe we can use unknown or nature. So, but it requires a mind that can go beyond their own dogma and their own biases, if you will. So it takes a long time to get to that point, but I thank you for this. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure, and hopefully you'll be here for the other ones as well. If there's still interest in reading through the rest of the text, we have another 5 chapters or sections of it to go. Alejandro, I see you requested the mic. Please feel free to speak.
Yeah, just briefly, first, thanks for the space to read it on. I know you're short on time, so I'll keep it short. I do hope you follow up. This is great. I guess I'm just going to share a general thought, which is that as I've been listening from the beginning, I've heard a lot of comparisons to other philosophies and schools of thought. Maybe I'd make an exception for what Spalatin was saying at the beginning, but in general, I'm concerned about rushing to comparison. You've made it clear that this was by no means a homogeneous school, even in its own context. This is one thinker's work. And when we start leaping across to other traditions, we're in danger of losing the specificity here. And way back at the beginning of the space, when we had an exchange, it seemed like one of the things I took from it, at least, was that Wang Bi was concerned to drill down into some of what's in the Lao-Tzu and to, well, restate it, right? I mean, I take it that the things that are in quotation marks here are him just restating the text of Lao-Tzu, but kind of rewrite it or restate it in a particular way. And I don't know, I guess I'm saying that I think as interpreters, it's as much our job to get preoccupied by these small differences, which which are of the greatest importance and understanding. We may have inclinations to honor these bigger movements towards universality or commonality in traditions. I suppose there's good intentions in that, but I think it clouds understanding.
Yes, thank you. So you mentioned the purpose of Wang Bi writing the text, and I had a fragment. I wrote a summary of it. Actually, I found the fragment through a secondary source, but it kind of describes what the point is of a Lue text, or a Li Lue text, which is what this is. This is the Wang Bi's Laozi Wei Zhilue Li, and it describes it as a work that will explain this. So it's basically a text that will explain the structure of a work and illuminate its ideas. It can also be written with the purpose of refuting other interpretations of the work it's commenting on. So yeah, just like you said, he's essentially explaining the structure of the Laozi and illuminating its chief ideas and trying to bring forth a model, I suppose. But you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify, I mean, I sort of said this as an assumption, but I want to get confirmation from you. when in the English text you shared, there's material in quotation marks. Those are Wang Bi citing directly the language of the Lao Tzu.
So so it's true. There's the brackets and the quotation marks. Where it's brackets, it's not in the Chinese. The brackets are him either because it's grammatically justified or because he thinks that's what is upcoming. Then he's written that in. And then for the quotation marks, it's not like Wang Bi. It's not like this text in the Dao Zhang indicated like this came from the Lao Tzu. But yes, he's using the quotation marks because he thinks it's a quotation from Wang Bi's copy of the Lao Tzu. So if we look at 13, it says, that is why, and then in brackets, the Lao Tzu says about the Dao. And then it says 14, as a thing, it comes out of the diffuse. As an image, it is without form. And you see there are quotation marks there. Yes, because the translator believes that Wang Bi is, he's quoting the Dao De Jing. Another example is 37. It says, that is why the Lao Tzu says. And actually, if I go to the Chinese here, hold on, I gotta find it. The Chinese is not as cleanly laid out as the English. Hold on.
And this also goes back to the problem you were talking about, whereas they can't figure that, the translator can't figure that out because they don't know exactly what version of the Lao Tzu you have. Yeah,
I mean the professor for this one, for the edition I'm reading, he goes into a long discussion of it and trying to, he has his arguments and he thinks he's figured it out pretty well, and no doubt he has. But 37, you say, that is why, in brackets, the Lao Tzu says. The text says, shi yi, so it's just that is why. And then 38, you see the quotation mark begins, and the quotation mark ends at 39. So a way that can be spoken of is not the eternal way. A name that can be named is not the eternal name. And then in the Chinese text, I can see it right here. It's Dao ke Dao, Fei Chang Dao, Ming ke Ming, Fei Chang Ming. Yeah. So right. So it is a quotation from the Dao De Jing. So your understanding is correct. It's just that 38 and 39 is a long-form quotation, and it's very clearly, like, no one would argue that is not from the Dao De Jing. But if it's just like one word in quotation marks, he has put it in quotation marks because he believes that what is being discussed is a section from the Dao De Jing, and it's using the same character or word as you would find in that text. But maybe someone else would argue otherwise. I don't want to act like that is necessarily always 100% true, because the Chinese does not, Wang Bi or whoever put this in the Dao Zhang is not dropping footnotes and citing the Dao De Jing.
Right, okay, yeah, thank you, that's helpful.
Sacred.
I just want to finish with the idea that when you're dealing, what really hit me is when you mentioned the word formless. Here you have a culture that has nothing to do with Western philosophy, and they talk about the formless, which is where a major part of what the Platonic thinking is about, and so that's when you get to the formless, you no longer can be in an empirical mind state, if I can say. This is where the walking of the sacred, be it however you want to frame that, to nature, the laws of nature, the laws of God, whatever.
Let's bring it
have to be in a different state to when you are in a different state, you can comprehend that differently than someone who works at the logical empirical state. So I'll leave it at that.
Let's keep it in. Thank you. Yes, let's root what you just said in the text, right? So how does he get to the term featureless? Right at the beginning, section 1 is, it is generally true with regard to that by which things are created, that things are naturally created out of the featureless. So he's saying that there are these things like trees and birds and rocks and things, and they're being created by something. and he doesn't want to say that it's just another rock creating a rock or a bird creating a tree. It's like he wants to go beyond the things, and that's really how he wound up with the formlessness, right? Because he's, here are the things with features or with forms or with names, and he wants something to create them, and he can't say it's just another one of those things. So he says it's not those things, or a negation of those things. It's literally wu xing, wu ming, so without form or features, without name, the thing that is without the feature, the thing that is without the name. So that's how we kind of got there. If we're just rooting our interpretation in the text and saying, how did he get to featureless? Well, he wanted to say that something created all the things with features, and he didn't just want to say it was another thing with features. So now we have the featureless, which is obviously this dark, mysterious. But I'm gonna, if I keep on that, I'll wind up going on a long tangent, and I'll never pick up my kids. But I will.
Thank you very much, brother. But we're on the same page. This is very interesting. I've dedicated my life to this the last 3 years.
Hopefully you pick up a copy.
We'll pick it up another time.
Yeah, pick up a copy of the book if you are really interested in Wang Bi. It's a Chinese reading of the Tao Te Ching, and it has this whole text, and it also has his Laozi Zhu, which is a line-by-line commentary on the Tao Te Ching, which is much longer. You don't need to know Chinese, although it's helpful, but you can just read the English translation. And just like a provisor, like Alejandro just reminded us, even within this Xuan Xue tradition, there's a lot of disagreement. Wang Bi is not the only one commenting on the Laozi. For example, there's another guy born around the same time, younger than Wang Bi, but 3rd century. And so Wang Bi is saying, the metaphysical other, the mother, is the source or root of things. It's a nourishing thing for them. It's a master of them. This other fellow, Guo Xiang, who is also a Xuan Xue scholar, he says, no, things don't have a master. They exist in their own right, because nothing comes from nothing, and I don't see things creating other things, and so things just have existence in their own right. Now, I don't want to get into an argument about whether he's right, and obviously I presented him in a very straightforward and flippant way, but yeah, even within the tradition, there are some really big debates and strong disagreements. I think I would just end by saying, not only thank you to everyone here, and thank you, Alejandro, for also pointing out that bit about even within the tradition there's disagreement, so don't be too eager to connect these guys to other traditions, although there's obviously a lot of overlap. But also don't abdicate your own role in the discussion by blindly following, one thinker and just agreeing with what they say, or just assuming they're on the right track or something. Because it may be, we read all of Wang Bi, and then we might just say, okay, that's what Taoism is. He's right. I agree with him. But then we read Guo Xiang, who I just spoke about, and we go, oh, geez, I think Guo Xiang is right now. So just I hope what we do is we understand what Wang Bi is saying, but at the same time, we don't sort of abdicate our own role, because, to be honest, there's plenty of disagreements I also have with Wang Bi. But I really do enjoy reading through this stuff, and I think it's been a good space. I have to go right now, or I'll be late. So see you later, guys. Bye.